I was 21 years old when I made the biggest financial mistake of my life. And the crazy thing is, at the time, I thought I was being smart. I thought I had it all figured out. You know how it is when you're young and you think you understand the world better than everyone else who came before you? Yeah, that was me. I had just dropped out of college. My parents were furious. My friends thought I was throwing my life away, but I was convinced I knew something they didn't. I was working construction at the time, making decent money for someone my age. Not great money, but decent. Enough to feel independent for the first time in my life. Enough to think I was on my way to something bigger. The thing about being 21 is that you feel invincible. Every dollar you make feels like proof that you've got this whole adult thing figured out. You start calculating in your head, if I'm making this much now, imagine what I'll be making in 5 years, 10 years. The math always works out perfectly in your head when you're young and optimistic. So there I was, living paycheck to paycheck, but feeling rich because I had my own apartment, my own bills, my own life. I remember the exact moment everything changed. I was sitting in my truck during lunch break, scrolling through my phone, when I saw an ad for cryptocurrency. This was back when Bitcoin was starting to get mainstream attention, when everyone and their brother was talking about how they wished they had bought in earlier. The ad was simple. It showed regular people who looked just like me, talking about how they had turned a few $100s into thousands, some into tens of thousands. There was this one guy, couldn't have been much older than me, standing in front of a nice car, talking about how he had bought Bitcoin when it was cheap and now he was set for life. I watched that ad 3 times. Then I spent the rest of my lunch break researching everything I could about cryptocurrency. Forums, YouTube videos, articles. Everyone was saying the same thing. This was the future. This was the opportunity our parents never had. This was how regular people could finally get ahead. The more I read, the more convinced I became that I was looking at the answer to all my problems. See, I had about $3,000 saved up. It wasn't much, but it was everything I had managed to put away after months of working my ass off and living as cheaply as possible. It was supposed to be my emergency fund, my safety net, the thing that would keep me afloat if something went wrong. But sitting there in my truck, reading story after story of people who had multiplied their money by investing in cryptocurrency, that $3,000 started to feel like wasted potential. It was just sitting in my bank account, earning basically nothing. Meanwhile, there were people out there turning their savings into fortunes. I called my buddy Jake that night. Jake was always the one in our group who seemed to know about money stuff. He had read some books about investing and was always talking about stocks and compound interest and all that. I figured if anyone would understand what I was thinking, it would be him. I laid out my plan. Take the $3,000, put it all into cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, and ride the wave that everyone was talking about. Jake listened quietly, and when I finished, he asked me one question that I should have paid more attention to. He said, "What happens if you lose it all?" I laughed. Actually laughed. I told him that was impossible. Sure, there might be some ups and downs, but everyone knew cryptocurrency was only going up in the long run. The technology was revolutionary. Major companies were starting to accept it. Countries were talking about adopting it. How could it fail? Jake tried to explain something about diversification, about not putting all your eggs in one basket, about the importance of having an emergency fund. But I wasn't really listening. I was already mentally spending the money I was going to make. I was thinking about how I could turn that 3,000 into 10,000, maybe 20,000. I was thinking about proving everyone wrong who said I was making a mistake by dropping out of college. The next day, I opened an account on a cryptocurrency exchange. I remember how official it felt, how grown up and sophisticated. I was entering the world of investing, the world of making money work for me, instead of the other way around. I transferred the entire $3,000 and bought Bitcoin at what I thought was a great price. For the first few weeks, everything went exactly as I had hoped. The price went up, not dramatically, but steadily. I would check my account multiple times a day, watching my investment grow. 3,000 became 3,200, then 3,500, then almost 4,000. I felt like a genius. I started telling people about it. Coworkers, friends, even my parents during one of our awkward phone calls, where they asked how I was managing financially. I told them about cryptocurrency, about how I was investing in the future, about how traditional investing was too slow and too safe for someone my age. I had energy and time on my side. I could take risks that older people couldn't. Looking back now, I can see how intoxicated I was by those early gains. Not just by the money, but by the feeling of being right, of being ahead of the curve, of being smarter than all the people who had told me I was making a mistake with my life. Every dollar my investment gained felt like validation. I started planning what I would do with the money. Maybe I would buy a better truck, something reliable that wouldn't break down every few months. Maybe I would move to a nicer apartment, somewhere I could actually bring a date without being embarrassed. Maybe I would take a vacation, something I had never been able to afford. The funny thing about those dreams is how real they felt. When you see your money growing every day, when you see the number in your account getting bigger, it stops feeling like a gamble and starts feeling like a sure thing. You start making plans based on money you don't actually have yet. But then something happened that I hadn't prepared for. The market turned. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't like watching water slowly drain from a bathtub. It was more like someone had pulled the plug and everything disappeared at once. I woke up one morning, checked my phone like I always did, and my $4,000 had become $2,800 overnight. Just like that. I stared at the screen, refreshing it over and over, thinking there had to be some kind of error, some glitch in the system. But the number kept showing the same thing. I had lost over $1,000 while I was sleeping. $1,000 that had taken me months to save. My first reaction wasn't panic, it was denial. This was just a temporary dip, a correction, like I had read about in all those articles. The smart investors, the ones who made real money, they held on during times like this. They didn't get scared and sell. They understood that volatility was just part of the game. So I held on. I told myself this was the test. This was what separated the real investors from the people who got scared at the first sign of trouble. I had read about this exact scenario. The market goes down, weak hands sell, prices drop even further, but then everything bounces back stronger than before. But it kept going down. 2,800 became 2,400, then 2,100, then 1,800. Every day I would wake up and check my phone, and every day the number was smaller. It was like watching my future disappear in real time, dollar by dollar. The worst part wasn't even the money, though. That was bad enough. The worst part was how stupid I started to feel. All those conversations where I had acted like I knew what I was doing, all those times I had explained to people why cryptocurrency was the future and why traditional investing was for old people who didn't understand technology. I stopped talking about it. When people asked how my investment was going, I would just say it was fine, that these things take time. But inside, I was starting to panic. Not just about the money, but about what this meant about me, about my judgment, about whether I was as smart as I thought I was. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November. I had been working a particularly tough job site, doing concrete work in the cold, and my back was killing me. I was tired, sore, and already in a bad mood when I checked my account. My investment had dropped to $1,200. I had lost more than half of everything I had saved. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a gas station and felt something I had never really experienced before. It wasn't just regret or disappointment. It was this deep, crushing realization that I had been living in a fantasy. That all those plans I had made, all those dreams about what I would do with the money, had been built on nothing. But here's the thing that really got to me. It wasn't just that I had lost money, it was that I had lost my safety net. Remember that $3,000 I had saved up? That was supposed to be my emergency fund. That was supposed to be the thing that kept me afloat if I got hurt on the job, or if my truck broke down, or if I couldn't find work for a few weeks. And now, sitting there in that gas station parking lot, I realized I had gambled away my security for the chance at something that was never guaranteed in the first place. I had taken the one thing that was supposed to protect me and turned it into the thing that was causing me the most stress. That's when the real fear set in. Not fear about the money I had lost, but fear about what would happen next. What if I got injured tomorrow? What if my truck broke down and I couldn't get to work? What if the construction job ended and I couldn't find another one right away? Before, I had $3,000 to fall back on. Now I had $1,200 that was disappearing every day. I started having these anxiety attacks. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, thinking about all the ways my life could fall apart without that safety net. I would lie there, calculating how long $1,200 would last if I couldn't work. The answer was not very long. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had invested that money because I wanted financial security. I wanted to build wealth, to get ahead, to create a better future for myself. But in trying to get rich quick, I had made myself more financially vulnerable than I had ever been. I kept holding on to that investment for another month, watching it slide from $1,200 to $900 to $700. Every day I told myself that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow the market would turn around. Tomorrow I would wake up and see green numbers instead of red ones. But it never happened. And eventually I had to face the reality that I couldn't keep pretending this was going to work out. I couldn't keep living in this constant state of anxiety, checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. The day I finally sold was one of the hardest days I can remember. Not because of the money, though losing 2/3 of my savings was brutal. It was hard, because it meant admitting that I had been wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. About the investment, about my understanding of risk, about my own intelligence. I sold everything for $650. Less than a quarter of what I had started with. Less than what I made in a single week of construction work. All those months of saving. All those sacrifices I had made to build up that emergency fund. Reduced to an amount that wouldn't even cover a month of rent. But you know what the real kicker was? The thing that made this whole experience so much worse than it needed to be? It wasn't just that I had lost money. It was that I had ignored every piece of good advice I had been given along the way. Jake had tried to warn me about putting all my money in one investment. My dad had always told me to never invest money I couldn't afford to lose. Hell, even some of the cryptocurrency articles I had read mentioned the importance of diversification and risk management, but I had dismissed all of it because I thought I knew better. I thought those rules didn't apply to me because I was young and willing to take risks. I thought conservative investing was for people who didn't have the vision to see the bigger picture. I thought I was being smart and aggressive when I was actually being reckless and naive. The months after I sold were some of the hardest I had experienced up to that point in my life. Not just financially, though, money was definitely tight. It was the psychological impact that really got to me. I felt like I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Every decision I made, I second-guessed myself. Every opportunity that came up, I wondered if I was making another mistake. I started working extra hours just to feel like I was doing something productive with my time. Anything to keep my mind off what I had done. I would take on weekend shifts, work late into the evening, pick up any overtime I could get, not because I particularly loved the work, but because it was the only way I could quiet the voice in my head that kept replaying my mistakes. The worst part about losing money isn't the money itself. It's what it does to your confidence. Every financial decision becomes this huge internal debate. Should I buy groceries for the week or just eat ramen and save $20? Should I fix my truck now or wait and hope it doesn't break down completely? Should I put $10 in savings or keep it for gas money? When you've made one catastrophic financial mistake, every small decision feels like it could be the next catastrophic mistake. You start questioning everything. You become paralyzed by the fear of being wrong again. I remember going to the grocery store and standing in the cereal aisle for 10 minutes, staring at a box of name brand cereal that cost $3 more than the generic version. $3. Before my cryptocurrency disaster, I wouldn't have even noticed the difference. But now, those $3 felt significant. They felt like evidence of whether I was being smart or stupid with money. This is what financial trauma does to you. It makes you hypervigilant about every penny, but not in a good way. Not in a budgeting, planning for the future way. In a scared, anxious, second-guessing everything way. My social life basically disappeared during this time. Not just because I didn't have money to go out, but because I was embarrassed. All those conversations where I had bragged about my investment, all those times I had acted like I had figured out some secret to making money that other people didn't understand. How do you face those people when you've lost almost everything? I became really good at making excuses. Oh, I can't go out tonight because I'm working early tomorrow. Oh, I'm trying to save money for something specific. Oh, I'm just not in the mood to be social right now. All technically true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I felt like a fraud. Like someone pretending to have their life together when everything was actually falling apart. And the crazy thing is, objectively, losing a few $1,000s isn't the end of the world. People lose more money than that in divorce settlements, medical bills, car accidents. But when you're young and that money represents everything you've managed to save, when it represents your entire sense of financial security, losing it feels catastrophic. I started having these conversations with myself late at night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that led me to that moment. What if I had just put that money in a savings account? What if I had listened to Jake's advice about diversification? What if I had only invested a small portion instead of everything? The what-ifs were killing me, because the answer to all of them was the same. I would have been fine. I would have still had my emergency fund. I would have still had that safety net. I might not have gotten rich, but I wouldn't have been lying there scared about how I was going to handle the next financial emergency. But here's something interesting that happened about 3 months after I sold my cryptocurrency. I was talking to this older guy at work, someone who had been doing construction for 30 years. We were on break, and somehow the conversation turned to money and investing. I didn't mention my cryptocurrency experience, but I asked him what he thought about all these get-rich-quick schemes you see advertised online. He laughed and told me about the time in the 80s when he had put his entire savings into some penny stock that his brother-in-law had recommended. Lost it all within 6 months. Then he told me about his friend who had gotten involved in some multi-level marketing thing in the 90s. Lost thousands. Then another story about someone else who had bought into the dot-com bubble. As he was telling these stories, I realized something. I wasn't the first person to make this mistake. I wasn't uniquely stupid or naive. This pattern of young people losing money on investments they don't understand has been happening for generations. The specific investment changes, but the psychology stays the same. There's something about being young and having a little bit of money that makes you feel invincible. You think you can see opportunities that other people miss. You think you can time markets, predict trends, outsmart the system. And sometimes, rarely, people do get lucky and make money doing this. But for every person who gets rich quick, there are hundreds who lose everything trying. This realization didn't make me feel better about losing the money, but it made me feel less alone in the experience. It made me understand that what I had gone through was part of a larger pattern of human behavior. People get excited by the possibility of easy money. They take risks they don't fully understand, and sometimes they get burned. The turning point for me came about 6 months after I sold my cryptocurrency. I had managed to save up about $800 again, slowly, painfully, $10 and $20 at a time. It wasn't much, but it was progress. It was proof that I could recover from this. I was sitting in my apartment one evening, looking at that $800 in my bank account, when I realized I had a choice to make. I could let this experience define me, could let it turn me into someone who was too scared to ever take any financial risks again, or I could learn from it and use it as the foundation for making better decisions in the future. The truth is, investing isn't inherently bad. Building wealth through smart financial decisions is actually incredibly important, especially when you're young and have time on your side. The problem wasn't that I had tried to invest. The problem was how I had done it. I had put all my money into something I didn't really understand, based on advice from strangers on the internet and advertisements designed to prey on people's desire to get rich quick. I had ignored basic principles of risk management and diversification. I had gambled with money I couldn't afford to lose. But now I knew better. Now I understood the difference between investing and gambling. Now I understood why people talk about emergency funds and diversification and risk tolerance. These aren't just boring concepts that old people invented to keep young people from making money. They're protective measures that exist because countless people before me had learned these lessons the hard way. So I made a decision. I would start over, but I would do it right this time. I would rebuild my emergency fund first, before even thinking about investing. I would educate myself about different types of investments, about how markets actually work, about the difference between speculation and long-term wealth building. Most importantly, I would never again put all my financial eggs in one basket. No matter how confident I felt, no matter how much potential an opportunity seemed to have, I would always maintain that safety net. It took me almost 2 years to fully recover from that mistake. 2 years to rebuild my savings, to restore my confidence in my financial decision-making, to feel secure again. During that time, I watched Bitcoin go through several more cycles of booms and crashes. Sometimes it would spike up to prices that made me think about what could have been, but mostly I felt relieved that I wasn't on that roller coaster anymore. The thing about financial regrets is that they teach you lessons you can't learn any other way. You can read books about risk management. You can listen to podcasts about investing. You can watch YouTube videos about personal finance. But until you've actually felt the gut punch of losing money you couldn't afford to lose, until you've experienced that anxiety of not having a safety net, you don't really understand why those principles matter. My biggest financial regret taught me that there's no such thing as easy money. It taught me that every investment carries risk, no matter how sure it seems. It taught me that the most important financial decision isn't which investment will make you rich, but how you protect yourself when things go wrong. Looking back now, I can see that losing that money was probably one of the most valuable experiences I've ever had. Not because losing money is good, but because it forced me to confront my own ignorance and overconfidence. It made me humble in a way that success never could have. If I could go back and talk to my 21-year-old self, I wouldn't tell him not to invest. I would tell him to start smaller, to educate himself first, to never risk money he couldn't afford to lose. I would tell him that building wealth is a marathon, not a sprint, and that the people who get rich quick are usually the exception, not the rule. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is learn from our mistakes and use that knowledge to make better decisions going forward. And maybe if we're lucky, we can share those lessons with other people who are standing where we once stood, holding their life savings and thinking about taking a risk they don't fully understand. Because here's what nobody tells you about financial mistakes when you're young. They don't just cost you money, they cost you time. And time is the one thing you can never get back. I spent the next 3 years working construction jobs, saving every dollar I could, trying to rebuild what I had lost. But it wasn't just about getting back to $3,000. It was about getting back to where I would have been if I had made smarter choices from the beginning. Let me put this in perspective for you. If I had taken that $3,000 and put it into a simple index fund when I was 21, something boring and safe that tracks the stock market, and just left it alone, by the time I turned 24, it would have grown to around $4,500. Not life-changing money, but solid growth. Instead, I was starting over from zero at 24. Same age, but 3 years behind where I could have been. And that gap, that lost time, it compounds. It grows bigger every year you don't address it. This is the real cost of financial mistakes. Not just what you lose, but what you miss out on while you're recovering. While I was scrambling to rebuild my emergency fund, my friends who had made smarter choices were buying houses, starting businesses, taking risks they could afford to take because they had built a foundation first. I remember running into my buddy Marcus about a year after my cryptocurrency disaster. We had worked construction together, made about the same money, started from similar places. But while I was throwing my savings at get-rich-quick schemes, he was putting $50 a month into a retirement account and keeping the rest in savings. Marcus had just bought his first house. Nothing fancy, but it was his. He had saved up for the down payment, qualified for the loan, had steady income. At 23 years old, he was building equity while I was still trying to get back to having $1,000 in the bank. I felt happy for him, genuinely. But I also felt this sting of regret. We had started in the same place, but his patience and my impatience had led us down completely different paths. He was building wealth slowly and steadily. I was still paying for the consequences of wanting everything right now. The hardest part about financial regret isn't the shame, though that's brutal. It's the opportunity cost. Every dollar you lose to a bad decision is a dollar that can't compound and grow over time. Every month you spend recovering from a mistake is a month you're not moving forward. But here's something I learned during those recovery years that changed how I think about money forever. Slow and boring usually wins. The people who build real wealth, the ones who retire early and live comfortably, they're not the ones chasing the latest investment trend or trying to time the market. They're the ones who do simple things consistently over long periods of time. I started reading everything I could about personal finance during this time. Not the flashy stuff about cryptocurrency or day trading, but the boring books about budgeting and compound interest and asset allocation. I learned about emergency funds and debt management and why index funds exist. And you know what I discovered? All the basic financial advice that I had ignored when I was younger, all the stuff that seemed too slow and too conservative, it actually works. Not because it's exciting or because it promises quick results, but because it's sustainable and it compounds over time. I learned that having 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in an emergency fund isn't just about being prepared for disasters. It's about having options. When you have that safety net, you can take calculated risks. You can invest in yourself, start a side business, change careers if you want to. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck, when you don't have that buffer, every decision becomes about survival instead of growth. I learned that investing small amounts consistently over time actually produces better results than trying to time the market or find the next big thing. The math is boring, but it's unforgiving. Someone who invests $100 a month starting at age 22 will have more money at retirement than someone who starts investing $5 a month starting at age 22, $100 a month at age 35. Time is the most powerful force in personal finance. More powerful than intelligence, more powerful than luck, more powerful than finding the perfect investment. And when you make mistakes like I did, you're not just losing money, you're losing time. By the time I turned 25, I had finally rebuilt my emergency fund and started investing again. But this time, I did it differently. I started with index funds, boring stuff that tracks the whole market. I automated my investments so I wouldn't be tempted to try to time anything. I kept my emergency fund separate and never touched it for investments. It felt slow. It felt conservative. It felt like exactly the opposite of the get-rich-quick mentality that had gotten me into trouble in the first place. But you know what? It worked. My investments grew steadily, not dramatically but consistently. More importantly, I slept better at night. I wasn't checking my account balance 5 times a day. I wasn't lying awake wondering if I was about to lose everything again. I had learned to separate my emotions from my money. That cryptocurrency mistake cost me more than money. It cost me years of growth, years of compound interest, years of building something real. But it also taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way, that there's no shortcut to financial security, that the boring advice your parents give you about saving and investing slowly actually works. That patience isn't just a virtue, it's a strategy. If you're sitting there right now with some money saved up, thinking about taking a big risk because you want to get ahead fast, just remember my story. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is nothing at all.